The city of Florence was founded in the 1st century BCE as a Roman military outpost, although it came to prominence as a centre of commerce and the arts in the 14th to 16th century CE. The Florentine method of speech even became the Italian language. Some of the city's most famous exports are Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, Michelangelo and Niccolo Machiavelli, along with the Medici family, of course. You can see the tombs of Galileo, Michelangelo and Machiavelli in the Basilica of Santa Croce. But that's not all you can find in this Tuscan city. From the mythological scenes to statues of Roman gods present in the Uffizi, Florence has a range of odd curiosities and folk traditions that are worth seeing. So let's explore some of the stranger side of Florence in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host, Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. We are back to normal... Wait, is there normal where Fabulous Folklore is concerned? You know what I mean, we're back to like normal programming, shall we say, after the Witches, Cunning Folk and Magic special theme of June. So I hope you enjoyed that while I was away in Italy. Obviously, as you can tell now, I'm back. I'm buzzing that the temperature has come down quite a lot. There was one day, I think it was when I was in Pisa, it was about 36 degrees C, and on another day in Pistoia it hit 38, which is way higher than I am used to. I mean, I had a nice trip. I came back with 2 spider bites. That was fun. Haven't got any superpowers as far as I'm aware. But yeah, so I'm back. So now we're back to doing things normally. And I thought it would be a good idea to do Florence first, because obviously I've just been there. When this particular episode goes out, it'll have been like a fortnight ago now that I was there. But I did actually go with stuff in mind to go and have a look at, because that's kind of how I travel now. In advance, I'll have a look and go, is there anything that I need to see or engage with? And in Florence's case, it's a slightly different kind of collection of things. So if you think back to the Milan episode, there was a lot of legends and ghost stories, but Florence is a little bit different. And I think that's a good thing, because it then demonstrates the variety of ways that we can engage with a city through its folk traditions and legends and just general bizarre stuff. So we are going to start off with the Santa Maria Novella pharmacy, which is found at Via della Scala 16, and it is well worth a visit. I can't stress that enough already. It is so interesting. It's Italy's oldest pharmacy and possibly the oldest still in operation in the world. Dominican monks from the nearby Basilica of Santa Maria Novella started growing herbs for use in their infirmary in 1221. The reputation for the quality of their medicine grew beyond the basilica, and the pharmacy opened to the public in the 17th century. Now, the pharmacy, which to some degree is a little bit of a misnomer of a name, because you might hear pharmacy and think of our contemporary pharmacies where they're selling pharmaceuticals and things like that. In this case, they're selling homewares, skincare, perfume, that kind of thing. But they still use the original preparation methods, and they also use the original Dominican recipes for some of their products as well. Now, I was particularly excited to see their Aceto de Cetri Ladri, or Seven Thieves Vinegar, after reading about it on Atlas Obscura. Now, obviously, I've heard of Four Thieves Vinegar, which I have covered before, but what about Seven Thieves Vinegar? Well, that one was new to me, and apparently it got its name because a band of 7 thieves applied the scent to ward off plague while they robbed corpses during a plague outbreak. And this was obviously the time when people believed that plague was caused by bad air or miasma, so strong scented products would apparently ward this off. Now, according to the legend, in this case, the vinegar contained 7 ingredients, and each member of the gang knew only one of them, so that could obviously help to preserve the secret of what was in it. The Four Thieves vinegar you often find associated with Marseille in France instead, but I just thought it was really interesting, and it is actually available for sale, and it's called Aceto Aromatico. And I really wish that I'd bought a bottle while I was there, but I couldn't actually find any in the store. But I've actually since ordered some from their website, so I will tell you what their Aceto Aromatico smells like when it turns up. So there we go. Now, the pharmacy itself is actually in a former papal residence, so it's incredibly ornate. It's got ceiling frescoes, there's statues, there's beautiful displays of the products and also the antique equipment, which I spent ages looking at. Although, if I'm honest, my favourite part of the pharmacy is the statue of Asclepius that you pass on the way in, and obviously I do have an episode all about Asclepius, the Roman god of medicine, as well. Now, it is true, it is a bit expensive. For example, I paid €12 for a bar of vetiver soap, but it was a very nicely packaged souvenir. I just think it's worth having a look at if you're interested in things like herbalism, or you're interested in old remedies and things like that. It is really interesting, I think you'll agree, that the Dominican monks were growing these herbs and so on for use in their remedies, because there is often this narrative that the church sort of stamped out herbalists and whatnot under the guise of witchcraft because they didn't want people having the knowledge when clearly monks had knowledge themselves. But that's a side issue. Definitely recommend going. There was actually a queue to get in when I left the shop. It just shows how popular it is, but rightly so. We're going to move on from the pharmacy to wine windows, and this isn't part of folklore per se, but it is a Florentine tradition, which to me makes it part of folk life, which is quite folklore adjacent. And the wine windows, or Bucette del Vino, were once a mainstay in the city. Now, the practice actually dates to 1559, when Cosimo de' Medici decided to let noble families sell wine directly from their palaces. The families would build windows into the outer walls of their palazzos, and passers-by would just knock on them for service. They would hand a servant an empty bottle and their payment, so the servant then went off to the cellar, filled up the bottle, and then passed it back through the wine window to the customer. Over time, the tradition fell out of use, but this was mostly because the palazzos then became hotels or apartments, so you didn't have the same link with winemaking and all that kind of thing. But the Babai restaurant actually revived the tradition with a wine window that was open for an hour every evening. Now, they didn't pass bottles back and forth, but they did serve wine by the glass instead. Now, surprisingly, 181 wine windows lie within Florence's city walls, with 26 beyond the walls and 112 around Tuscany. Around 90 were removed or lost, so the Bucette del Vino Association is actually trying to champion the restoration and maintenance of them, which is very cool. Now, one wine window on Via della Belladonna actually has a slab featuring the window's opening times, which is quite cool because it demonstrates how busy the windows could be, and how the families basically try to deter people from seeking wine at ungodly hours. Only brand new mothers who needed the sustenance and soldiers leaving for battle could ignore the opening hours and knock on the windows whenever they wanted. Now, unsurprisingly, these windows were financially beneficial during the earliest lockdowns during the COVID pandemic, because it meant that businesses could still serve customers while preserving distancing rules. And one gelateria actually serves coffee and gelato through their wine window, which I think is a marvellous idea. When I was there, I did see a couple of people using them. There was one particular one where there wasn't any seating outside, and I think that the cafe wasn't actually technically open yet, but they were serving through the wine window. So there was this couple who, you noticed, like, this glass just get passed through the window to them, and then obviously they were just quite happily enjoying their wine standing in the street outside this venue. It was very, very strange. And then further on we saw some people who were gathered around a wine window, and they had obviously knocked for service and they were busy putting their order in. So they are obviously a popular thing. I think they're mostly popular with tourists more than anything, because people then quite like to take photos of their drinks and whatnot. But it is just a really cool part of Florentine history, as it were, that has been brought back to life, which is quite cool. Now, obviously, certain parts of these traditions can tend to be a little bit more popular with tourists than locals, and Il Porchelino can sort of feel a little bit like that as well. And he is a beloved bronze sculpture of a boar that you'll find in Piazza del Mercato Nuovo. Now, the tradition is relatively simple, but I've also found 3 different versions of it, so again, it's one of those things, it depends which one you listen to. But the general tradition that I found was that you need to feed a coin to the boar for luck and rub his snout so that you'll return to Florence. And Tobias Smollett noted the tradition as far back as 1766, which probably explains why his nose is so brightly polished. So the rest of the boar has sort of got that weird green-brown patina that bronze develops over time, but his nose is like gold. It's very, very easy to spot him. Now, according to one source, he is partly hollow, so that you can then feed him your coin before rubbing his snout. A different source said that you needed to hold the coin in the boar's mouth while rubbing his nose with your other hand. You then let the coin drop, and if it falls in the grate, you would get you good luck. Whereas my Italian host told me that you needed to rub the coin on his snout and then try to slide the coin off into the grate in front of him. And if your coin went into the grate, then you would get you good luck. So it is quite difficult to know which is the correct one, so to speak, or if all of them are equally valid. It's hard to tell. But surprisingly, Il Porcellino dates to 1634, and he was crafted by Pietro Tacca. Tacca took inspiration from the Hellenistic marble boars, which may have represented the mythical Caledonian boar. Il Porcellino was supposed to be included in a fountain in the Boboli Gardens on the south side of Florence, but somehow he ended up in the Mercato Nuovo instead. Hans Christian Andersen even describes Il Porcellino in his story The Metal Pig. But it is worth pointing out that this Il Porcellino is actually not the original, but rather a replica made to replace the original when it went into a museum in 1998. Yet people have still been quite happily engaging with the replica pretty much since then, so it just goes to show that I think it's the idea of the boar that's important, not necessarily the specific sculpture. There are also replicas all over the world, including one in Sydney, Australia, and people really do flock to the replica in search of good luck and a photo opportunity for social media, naturally. There is a photo of me, which if you're watching on YouTube, you will be able to see it on screen, having a go at it. I've no idea if I did it right. I did the one that my Italian host gave, which was the idea of rubbing the coin on the snout and then trying to drop it into the grate. It did go into the grate, so whether I get any good luck or not remains to be seen. I'm not quite sure how I would know what was associated with the boar, but that's the nature of these things. Now we're going to move on to a completely different part of Florence, and this is La Berta, which is a stone head with that particular name that is actually stuck out of the side of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore on Via dei Caritani since the medieval era. And it's literally what it sounds like. It is a stone head stuck in the wall, sort of looking down towards the street. It's really, really hard to spot. So I actually had to go back and look at some of the photos to work out, well, which drain pipe is it near, so I can figure out where it is. No one knows for certain why the head is there, so of course folklore has rushed in to fill the vacuum left by the absence of facts. One legend claims that she was a woman who was petrified by the astrologer Cecco d'Ascoli. On 16th of September 1326, a procession carried d'Ascoli to the stake so he could be burned for heresy. The procession moved along Via dei Caritani, and he stopped to ask for water. Berta watched this from a church window high above, but she went round telling everyone not to give him anything to drink, because she reasoned that he was an alchemist who used water to speak to the devil. So if they gave him a drink, she said, he would basically then ask the devil for help, so it was better off not giving him any water. A furious d'Ascoli cursed Berta, and her head has stuck out of the wall where the window was ever since. Another theory claims that there is a more mundane reason why the head is part of the bell tower wall and not a window. Apparently a greengrocer donated bells to the church and the head is somehow a memorial to him. That one doesn't really hold much water for me, because you think, why would you then have this female head as a memorial to a male greengrocer who donated bells? It doesn't really make any sense when you would think there'd be a plaque or something like that. But as I say, that is one of the theories. However, the most likely explanation is that the head was part of a Roman statue and it was then just simply reused as a decoration in the Middle Ages, and apparently this was something of a common practice, recycling old statues as decor. So I thought that's quite interesting. It's just a weird thing to go and say because it's not something that you see every day. It's not something that I'd actually seen anywhere else, and because it's a relatively easy church to find near the main Duomo, I thought, well, I'll go and have a look, but then it's really hard to actually find the head when you're there. But if you do go and have a look, now you know to actually look up, and it is on the side of the Via dei Caritani, so it's on that side because it sort of sits on a corner. That's the side that you want, next to the bell tower. And speaking of sculpture, I thought it was worth including Perseus with the head of Medusa. I wasn't originally going to include this, but then because I did discover there is a little bit of a legend associated with its construction, I thought it was actually worth mentioning. So this is the sculpture by Benvenuto Cellini, and it stands in the Piazza della Signora beside the Palazzo Vecchio. And this sculpture captures the moment that hero Perseus decapitates Medusa and then holds aloft her head. I do talk about Medusa's appearance in art in my pre-recorded talk, The Many Faces of Medusa, so I'm not going to talk about the Medusa and Perseus element of the sculpture at this particular juncture because I do cover it in that talk, and obviously there is a link if anyone would like to actually buy that talk and find out more about how Medusa appears throughout art and film as well, because we do go into more recent films as well. But in this particular episode, I want to focus on the legend behind the commissioning of the sculpture. Now, according to the story, Cellini approached Duke Cosimo I with his idea for the sculpture. Cosimo liked it, and he thought it would boost his status as an art expert. But he also looked at the models that Cellini produced, and he announced that the statue would fall over because it was basically too top-heavy. Cosimo also warned Cellini that there were too many elements for the bronze casting process, and that the bronze wouldn't be able to flow fast enough to fill things like the arm and sword. So this is that particular casting method where you sculpt the inner part, and then you cover it with wax. You then encase that in another material, and then when you pour the molten bronze in, it melts the wax and fills the space left by the wax. And then once it's cool, you crack it open and you have your sculpture. And that's why they're obviously hollow as well. So as far as Cosimo was concerned, because you've got like the head that's aloft and you've got your sword and there's always different bits and pieces, the bronze wouldn't be able to actually flow to fill them, and that you would end up with an incomplete casting. Now Cellini assured Cosimo that it would work, except once he actually started, he discovered that Cosimo was right. The bronze wouldn't flow fast enough to fill the entire sculpture. Now his assistants then threw all of his wooden furniture onto the fire to make it burn hotter so that the bronze would run better, but when that didn't work, they ended up adding silverware and pewter to the mixture, and that made the bronze more liquid, and that was actually the part that worked, so that the bronze then quite happily flowed into all of the different parts of the sculpture, and it was cast with no flaws. But even better, it turned out that Cellini had been right and that it didn't topple over once it was installed on its pedestal. Interestingly, when it was installed in the loggia, which is where you'll find it, it faced the replica of Michelangelo's David that's in that particular square. Dr. Beth Davis and Dr. David Drogan suggest that this means it looks like Medusa's head has petrified David. Because Cellini's statue was commissioned by the Medicis and David represented the Florentine Republic, it also came to represent the way in which the Medicis felt they had conquered the Republic. If you are a fan of Medusa, though, you can also see Caravaggio's famous Medusa painting in the nearby Uffizi gallery. Definitely well worth seeing. If, like me, you are a bit of a fan of Medusa, you will kind of look at Perseus and just go, you idiot. But otherwise, as I say, it is definitely worth seeing that particular sculpture, particularly knowing this backstory about the legitimate artistry that went into its creation. Now we're going to finish off with La Specola, and particularly its Anatomical Collection, which is the largest and best known wax anatomical collection. La Specola itself is also Europe's oldest public museum. It began as the Medici family's personal collection and then opened to the public in 1775 on the orders of Grand Duke Peter Leopold. The wax anatomical models proved to be incredibly popular, and while they're not connected with folklore, they are worth seeing if you are interested in anatomy or the history of medicine like I am. Clemente Suzzini sculpted the models as teaching aids at a time when performing anatomy to learn about the body could be difficult. Now, it wasn't entirely absent, because the Ospedale del Ceppo in nearby Pistoia had an anatomical theatre that actually held 12 to 15 students to both watch and undertake dissection as part of their studies. Pistoia's anatomical school actually opened in 1666, and its anatomical theatre dates to 1787. But the anatomical waxes allowed for the study of the body at times when dissections couldn't be performed, such as the summer. So, for example, when I was at Pistoia's anatomical theatre, I was told that they could only really do the dissections between October and April, because outside of that it was just too hot to do them, and you can imagine what would happen if you were trying to dissect a corpse in warm weather. It wouldn't be very pleasant. So these anatomical waxes would then help to supplement your study in those particular points. Now, they are based on corpses, so they are incredibly accurate, and they're one of these kind of things where people genuinely still love them even now. And they also have a series of anatomical Venuses, which are just completely wrong on every level, because they're wax models of naked women that have been posed in these like semi-erotic poses, the way you often see Venus posed in art, but then they've got their internal organs on display. It's a really, really weird thing to see, and apparently the Marquis de Sade was especially fond of them, because of course he was. You can find the museum in the former Palazzo Torrigiani at Via Romana 17. It is worth seeing anyway. Obviously the entire museum itself is a natural history museum, so there's also gems on display, and they've got some taxidermied animals and so on. Obviously a bit like the Natural History Museum in London, they're really old, so while this isn't a thing that people still do, they're some of the original ones. So there's a lot of science stuff on display, but the anatomical waxes are why most people go. Indeed, that was why I went, because as I say, I've had this long run and fascination with the history of medicine since I was about 8, so that tells you a lot about me. But ultimately though, what do we make of these Florence legends and traditions? Well, these Florentine sites show how folk traditions, legends and local oddities can lie in plain sight in even the busiest city. Such stories become part of the tapestry of the city's culture, and the tales involving the Medici family are especially noteworthy given their importance to the city's rise in power. It's obviously impossible to tell how many ordinary people told or even knew these stories, though the age of some of them suggests that they weren't simply invented for tourists, they were obviously just part of Florentine life. Now, looking for them, whether it's going to the pharmacy or trying to find Berta, takes you to various parts of the city that you might otherwise walk past without a second glance, and they will help to give you a different experience of the city. So if you do find yourself in Florence, try using these sites as a starting point for your own adventures, and who knows what you'll encounter while you're there. So I hope you enjoyed that particular episode. Like I say, it is always quite fun doing these city-based episodes, and I can tell you next week is going to be Dublin, after I went to Dublin in October last year and thoroughly loved it, so big fan of Dublin. I also want to let you know in advance, because August is going to be Ghost Month, which might sound weird because you would expect me to do that maybe in October. However, there is a reason I'm doing it, and it's because my next book with DK Publishing comes out on August the 7th, and that is Ghost Lore. And this is the follow-up to Rebel Folklore. So where Rebel Folklore explored 50 rebellious figures from folklore around the world. So these are the figures that are not wholly malevolent, not wholly benevolent, but sort of sit in this grey area in between. Ghost Lore is looking at supernatural creatures, ghosts, a few monsters, again, that appear around the world. So some of them have obviously been on the podcast before. I include, for example, the Paris Catacombs ghost because I'm fascinated by him. But then there are also ghosts from further afield. So we have Fisher's ghost in Australia, for example. We have the Onryo in Japan. We have La Planchada in Mexico. So there's a wider range of ghosts in this one. So if you're really interested in the supernatural, this is going to be the one for you. It follows a similar format to Rebel Folklore. So we have a little bit of almost a story idea around how you might encounter one of these figures, and then an exploration of stories associated with them and where they may have come from. So it was so much fun to do. The illustrations are amazing. I think you'll really enjoy this one. There is going to be an unboxing on Instagram, so if you don't follow me on there, if you follow me at Icy Sedgwick, you will then see the unboxing when I post that next week, so you can see how gorgeous this book looks. So I hope that you're excited about that as I am. So I will be dedicating August to ghosts and all things supernatural, because obviously that's to tie in with Ghost Lore coming out. If you have got any specific requests for anything ghostly that I haven't covered before, by all means, please do feel free to make a request. But I will tell you in advance, our first episode is going to be about poltergeists, because I realised that I've never actually really looked into them properly. So you can look forward to that as well. So I hope that you are interested. You can pre-order the book already. The links are in the show notes, so you'll get your copy when it comes out on August the 7th. And yeah, definitely keep an eye out for the unboxing video when I post that sometime next week. But anyway, as always, it's been marvellous to hang out with you. It's kind of nice to be back to normal service, as much as I loved all of my interviewees, and I really enjoyed doing the interviews for the June Witches and Cunning Folk and Magic month. It is quite nice to just kind of go off on and explore with you again around some of these cities for this particular month's theme. So anyway, thank you very much for sticking around, and I'll see you next week. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.